Steve agus fáilte a rash to the Crazy House Prices podcast, where I try to make housing in Ireland simple to understand. I'm your host, Ciarán Mulqueen, and today in episode 29, I'm joined by Michael Byrne, or Mick Byrne, a leading voice on housing policy, to dive into the recent results of the general election. Mick is a lecturer in political economy at UCD, and most of his work focuses on housing, and he also has a weekly analysis of housing policy and politics over on his Substack. It's an excellent resource, and I recommend you sign up for the weekly emails. I'm sure by now you've seen the results of the general election, so I won't waste time running through which parties or independents won seats, but the gist is basically there are now 174 seats in the Dáil for TDs, and in order for a government to have a stable majority, it's usually assumed that they need about 90 plus seats. This is why we never get a single party government, as none of the individual parties tend to have enough voter share to take 90 seats by themselves. So Fianna Fáil won 48, Fine Gael won 38, so between them they've 86 seats. So it's looking increasingly likely that they will go into government together and take a few independents, a lot of whom are ex-Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil anyway, in with them so that they have a majority to vote however they see fit, thus resulting in them electing a Taoiseach by majority vote, likely Micheál Martin. There's also the chance that they'll go in with the Labour Party instead of independents, so time will tell on that. But in this episode, we explore why Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael managed to convince voters again, the impact of their policies on homeowners and renters, and some practical solutions to Ireland's housing challenges. Now, I know I can often tend to focus a bit more on home ownership side of things in this podcast and on my Instagram page. So this episode has a really good mix of info for renters and ideas for renting, as well as wannabe homeowners. So make sure you listen to the end as Mick shares some really interesting ideas. Hi, I am just going to pause the podcast for a second to talk to you about some sponsors of the Crazy House Prices podcast. This episode is sponsored by Daft.ie. Daft is Ireland's #1 property portal. Daft has the most properties available for sale and rent, and is the preferred national property website amongst consumers in Ireland. So Daft.ie's core vision is to make buying, selling and renting property better for everyone in Ireland. So Daft's mission is to simplify each step of every property transaction in the Irish market to make buying, selling and renting in Ireland simple. That's why Daft.ie build innovative tools like Offers by Daft, an online real-time offers platform that provides never before seen transparency for the Irish consumer when buying a home. Are you looking to buy? Maximise your chances of finding your dream home by visiting Daft.ie, Ireland's #1 property website. Now I have Mick Byrne with me today to have a quick chat about the election, some takeaways from the recent general election and some ideas going forward. How are you, Mick?
I'm doing great, Ciarán. Great to be here.
Thanks for coming on. And I read your email every week, and some really good ideas in there. So I think just your one I got today was about kind of takeaways from the election. So why do you think voters stuck with Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael on housing? Like, we know the record of high rents, high house prices, homelessness. So what do you think worked for them? Why do you think everyone stuck with them? Well, 40% of people.
Yeah, I think this was probably the most fascinating aspect of the election, because on the one hand, you have to think this is an open goal for parties like Sinn Féin, Soc Dems, Labour, and they were hoping that housing would feature big time in the election, and it did, right? Because the exit poll analysis shows us that it was the #1 issue for voters. So by any account, this should have been a real struggle for Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, and they should have been on the back foot throughout the election campaign. But they managed to effectively kind of neutralise the housing issue, and I think they did that in two ways. The first thing they did over the last 4 years was they have started to back kind of government provided housing. So that's social housing. They massively increased investment in social housing. And then they created 2 new government or public housing tenures that are called cost rental and affordable purchase. And in their manifestos, they were promising to increase those sectors further, more or less along the same lines as the opposition parties. So that meant they kind of insulated themselves from what you would expect to be the traditional left-wing criticism that they're all pro-market, pro-developer, right? They were really able to shut that down effectively. On the other hand, they had a really clear message in terms of what they were promising homeowners, and that was more help to buy, essentially. So I think they correctly recognized that most voters as opposed to most people, right? Most voters are either existing homeowners, many of whom have already got Help to Buy, or they're aspiring to be homeowners. And they wanted to give them a clear message. We're going to give you money to buy a house in a normal way, just like your parents did, just like you maybe have been dreaming of, that kind of thing. And it was a simple message and it was clear. Whereas the left, they did have some great ideas for home ownership, but they were very technical and they had a lot of different ideas. I think it wasn't really clear what they were actually promising people. So I think Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, basically, they really tapped into people's aspirations.
Yeah, and I think the people know, especially if people have been looking to buy a home for the last few years, they know about Help to Buy, they know about the shared equity scheme. So maybe there was a familiarity there with those terms, what they are. Their friends did it, they got 30 grand. So that's what I want. And I know Fianna Fáil then were promising 50 grand. So we'll see where that goes. Now, anyone listening to this or anyone who's following me on Instagram probably know my opinions on the shared equity and the Help to Buy. I think as macroeconomic policies, they're inflationary. They're demand side policies when we really need supply. But as I always say, they're there, they're in place. If people can use them and if they can help them get into a home, well then, by all means, they should use them. Like I wish I would have loved an extra 30 grand when I bought my house, but there was nothing for me because I bought an old house. So I know they're talking about extending those as well to the secondhand properties or existing properties or whatever. So what are your thoughts on that? Do you reckon that will be more inflationary or do you think it will have an impact at all?
It will definitely be more inflationary. There's no doubt about that. I mean, there's like anybody who studies this will agree with that. I think Help to Buy, it's not the policy I would do, like, in a perfect world, but we're not in a perfect world. So I see the problems with it. I agree with everything you said, but I can also see why people feel it has a role. Okay. Now, currently, it's, as you said, it's only for new properties. And that's a big plus side for it, because even if it does push up prices, well, that makes it easier for developers to build. So that's what we talk about. It makes development more viable. So it can potentially...
That was the selling point of it originally anyway.
Oh, it was always the selling point. It's a supply stimulus. So that kind of, I can see that aspect of it, even if I don't love everything about the policy. But if you start putting this into the second-hand market, the only plus side it has is that if a homeowner is bidding against the landlord and the landlord can't access this subsidy, which they won't be able to, it could give the homeowner the edge. So it could help to move some properties from private rental into home ownership. Now, again, that's not straightforward positives, the downsides to that as well. But that's the one benefit of it. But it definitely, in my view, wouldn't compensate for the downside, because all you're going to do is push up prices in the second-hand market as well. And that's going to affect people who are buying existing owners. So if you're an existing owner and you want to buy a second-hand property, you can't get that subsidy, but you're going to be paying that inflated price. So a lot of people will actually be very disadvantaged by that. Say people who want to trade up because their family is grown, something like that, or they need to move location for work or whatever, they're going to be really disadvantaged in that regard.
Yeah, and selfishly thinking of myself, I wasn't, because I bought an older house and I bought before all these grants were in, I couldn't get the Críochnatha or anything. I couldn't get the Help to Buy. I was literally 200 meters outside the Living City initiative. And now if this comes in on second-hand homes, if we were to try and sell this, move on to another, we'd be stung again. But so from a selfish side, yeah, it's not great for me. But as you said, you can see where it's going to help people in the short term, but likely will have an inflationary thing. I remember when I was keeping track of all the new build stuff, and when they announced the extension of the Help to Buy, I guess with my page, it's almost like a collective investigations, because I just get so many messages and screenshots sent in. And when they extended it, I was getting screenshots sent in. This is the price of this house yesterday, and now it's up 10 grand because they've increased the Help to Buy. And so, it does happen overnight, but
it does happen overnight. I think if Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael go in with Labour and or the Soc Dems, I think they won't extend it. Now that's just a guess, but I think that'll be the compromise, right? Because Labour and the Soc Dems were saying get rid of it. Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael were saying extend it. I think the compromise will be leave it as it is. If Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael go in with independence, I think there's a good chance we'll see it extended.
And increase, do you think?
Yeah, I don't know if we'd see both, because it was, I think it was Fianna Gael were saying increase it from 30 to 40 grand. Fianna Fáil were saying extend into the second-hand market. So they had slightly different approaches to it. So I don't know if we'd see both of them or one of them, or exactly how we'd see it.
Yeah, I guess when you think about it, when you take a step back and you think it really shouldn't require multiple schemes, multiple grants just for people to buy a house. But that's where we are, unfortunately, due to, I guess, one could argue due to policy from this government. But that's
and look, in part it doesn't, because a big chunk of people who get those grants, at least 30%, according to the research, they don't need it.
Yeah, it's not targeted to anyone else.
No, the research shows they have the deposit. So what's happening there is you're increasing better off households' ability to buy expensive houses, and what that's going to do is drive up economic inequality in the medium and long term. So it's a bad story from the point of view of equality, if people are interested in that.
Yeah, very good point. Yeah, did anything else stand out to you in terms of housing policy then that was kind of promised during the campaign, or what else worked or didn't work?
There was loads of interesting things. I mean, the big standout from somebody like me who've been watching housing policy for at least 10 years, the big standout is that everybody is promising to spend loads on the government housing, social housing, cost rental and affordable purchase. Like they're all saying in their promised targets that at least 30%, I mean, all government parties, opposition parties, that the government provided housing will be at least 30% of total output, like so upwards of 22,000 units per year. And that's really interesting, because in the past we would have never seen centre-right parties really backing that type of stuff, because they were much more clearly pro-market. So that's really interesting. And one thing we will see, if that comes to pass over the next 5 years, is that you'll have much more people living in cost rental and affordable purchase. At the moment, it's only a couple of thousand. And as they build up, more people will probably understand those schemes, and it will make they'll be probably feature bigger in the next election. And that'll be kind of interesting to see what the kind of politics of that is. Does that change a little bit the conversation around housing? The other thing is they're all planning, of course, if you want to increase government provided housing, you need to increase investment. So they're all planning to spend an awful lot of money on housing. Like they're all saying they're going to increase it it's already at record highs, right? And they're all promising at least another couple of billion per annum. And what that means is if we do have a recession, or we do have problems with government tax receipts, which many people are worried about with Trump and all that stuff, then you're going to then see a big fork in the road for Irish housing, because there's going to be a decision to be made, which is, do we cut social housing, cost rental and affordable purchase, or do we keep going and somehow find the money elsewhere? And there'd be a huge temptation for Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil to cut, because it's one of the easiest parts of government spending to cut back on. Now, with the housing crisis, it'll be hard to do politically, but you could still argue it's going to be a lot easier to do politically than cutting people's social welfare payments or cutting public sector worker pay or something like that. So that will be decisive, because if that happens, that means we definitely are going to be stuck in this housing crisis for at least another 10 years. If that doesn't happen, we've some chance of digging ourselves out of this hole. So that's, for me, next 5 years, number one thing I'm watching on housing policy is that, because otherwise there's a fairly big consensus among government and opposition on what needs to happen. There's differences, and they're important differences, but there's a lot of consensus about that the government needs to be a big provider of housing.
Yeah, and I think everyone's kind of agreeing on that across the board. So in terms of that then, what do you think is realistic for targets then for this next government?
Well, targets is a funny one, right? I basically, like the media and political discussion about targets, I just ignore it, right? In terms of how I do analysis, it's just for the political process, it's a talking point. The role that targets should have, and as you know, in the summer, this expert housing commission that was set up by the government published a big, huge report. And one of the things they said very clearly is that the whole point of targets is to reflect need, not ability to deliver. And there's a reason why you have that, because when you have those targets, then that means all other aspects of government policy have to then reflect those targets. And that means that at least you could possibly hit those targets, right? So you're kind of setting yourself up for success, but it doesn't really, it shouldn't be what you think is realistic to achieve. And there's a bit of a problem there because governments are a little bit trying to be realistic because they don't want to look like they fell short on what they promised. But from a housing policy point of view, falling short isn't the problem. Aiming too low would be the problem, if you see what I mean. So you want to aim for what the needs are and then just deliver as much as you can. In terms of what they actually did promise and how realistic it is, it's not realistic. So the Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael are both promising total output of 60,000 units per year. This year, we're looking at about 35,000 units overall, and that has cost us a hell of a lot to get there. It's taken 10 long, hard years, as you know. So the idea that we're going to go from 35,000 to 60,000 in a couple of years, in my view, is just fantasy. Similarly, in the non-market sector, like social housing, cost rent and affordable purchase, most of that supply is coming from the approved housing bodies, the housing associations, right? Like Clúid and TUA and all these organizations. They've already scaled up massively. They've got a huge amount of debt. They've been recruiting staff like crazy. So can they do more? Like, yeah, they can do more, but like at that scale, I don't see it happening. And now again, I'm not really worried about that because I just think, yeah, 60,000 is what we need. So let's aim for it. But in terms of will we achieve it? I don't think so.
I'm going to pause the podcast for a second because I want to talk to you about a company called Financial Planning Matters. Their website is fpms.ie. This is a company that I know very well and the team behind it are fantastic. It's a small Irish company that believes that financial planning should be accessible, easy to understand and affordable for everyone. That's why they offer personalised financial advice that's tailored to your unique needs and goals. Their team of expert financial planners will look at your current financial situation and develop a personalised strategy to give you a roadmap to achieve your financial goals. It's not just about setting up a pension or investing your money. They'll consider all aspects of your finances to help you get to where you want to be. So that could be saving for your deposit. It could be knowing where to invest your children's allowance. It could be maybe you have loads of money and you want to know what to do with it. So their customer service is incredible. I've been using them for over a year now and I cannot recommend them enough. So check out fpms.ie. Now, back to the podcast.
Yeah, I would totally agree with all of that, to be honest. And that was, I think, a lot of the issues with opposition policies as well. They're promising all this stuff and people, people are fairly clued in and they know we just don't have the people there. And I know the argument could be made, well, they're building the wrong things, they're building data centers, they're building hotels, whatever. I'm beside the new children's hospital here. There's loads of stuff being built around me. None of it is for sale. So all those targets, I'd agree with you there. I kind of ignored as well, and I also ignored the stuff they say in the campaign as well. Where Michael Byrne said it, I don't know how many times, that they're on track to hit 40,000 homes this year when we know they're not. And as he said, it'll end up around about 33,000. But then also in terms of affordability, usually anywhere between around a quarter to a third of those are actually come to market for sale. So people keep asking me where price is going to go, and look, I'm just a dude with a phone, but it doesn't take a genius to realize that in order for prices to come down, we need more homes available that people can buy. It's simple supply and demand. And if we're not hitting high targets and then such a low percentage of those are actually coming for sale,
yeah,
everybody then is competing in the existing home market. And then if they're adding Help to Buy to that as well, I just think it's going to be chaos in terms of house prices. I can't see them.
I think you're spot on. And look, if you want to know what's going to happen with house prices, the best thing to look at is actually wages. So if you think to yourself and the company you work in, whatever, what way are wages going? And that's the way house prices are going to go, because at the moment, the supply is not there. It's going to undershoot for sure for the next 5 years, let's say. So as long as wages are going up, people are going to have more money to spend on housing, and that's where the demand is going to be there. It's going to be growing, so the house prices are going to go up. Now they are getting quite peaky, so there's a question about that. And I think the only real way we'd see house prices come down is if we see something problematic in the economy. So if something does happen with the Trump shock, something happens with employment, especially in sectors like tech, pharmaceuticals, finance, law, all that stuff, or if there's a recession and we see public sector pay freezes again, or a ban on promotions in the public sector, those types of things, they're the things that can suck demand out real quickly. Because all of a sudden people, obviously, if your wages go down, if you lose your job, you immediately change your whole perspective and you think you get much more conservative about everything. So that just sucks up demand overnight. And that's really where a change could happen. I don't see the supply side delivering more affordability in the next 5 years or so.
Yeah, and that's, having lived through the last one, no one wants to see that. That's the last thing anyone wants, is another giant recession. So I guess switching the focus away from home ownership and looking at maybe some ideas that you might have, or some solutions towards the rental market. So I'm always conscious that a lot of my stuff is all about home ownership, and I'm a big believer in home ownership. But in terms of renting and solutions in there, you have some good ideas on that. So do you want to maybe tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think private rental sector, to be honest with you, was a little bit lost in the discussion in the election, and there wasn't that much focus on what the parties were promising in that space. I think some of the opposition parties, especially Sinn Féin and the Social Democrats, they switched over the last couple of years. They've been focusing much more on home ownership, much less on rental. And Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael don't see any votes in renting, so they don't focus on that at all. And the parties' manifestos are actually really quite strange on private rental. So Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael were basically saying steady as you go. They didn't promise any new changes. So they want to extend the rent pressure zones, which, as you know, cap prices at a max rent increase of 2% per year. And they're saying they're going to extend them out to 2025, or sorry, for the next 5 years. They're supposed to expire in 2025, next year. Whereas the left parties were going very, very radical on rental. So they were all promising rent freezes, and they were all promising eviction bans, temporary ones, so 3 years or so for both of them. And then in the longer term, they were saying they were going to introduce security of tenure for life for tenants. And they were saying they were going to move to this new rent regulation system that's called reference rents, which we can talk about if you want. It's a bit technical, but we could talk about it. But I'll start with security of tenure. So this issue needs to get sorted. It's the one thing that we've had from the beginning of the housing crisis. If you go all the way back to 2014, when homeless figures started to go through the roof, it was blatantly obvious that what was driving homeless figures is that people were getting evicted. Now, what is the problem with people getting evicted from the private rental sector? Okay, there's two problems with it. There's a straightforward problem, you lose your home. But there's another problem, is that it's unpredictable. So what happens is the letter arrives in your letterbox one day. Now there you have, that means that for your whole time you're living in private rental, you never know when that letter is going to come, right? The number of days that you can be sure you're not going to receive that letter is 0. So you've no security, in my view. So that means it's horrible living in the private rental sector, especially if you're at a point in your life when you want security. Like when you're maybe moving around a bit, you're younger or whatever, or you're in a different country, it's not as big of a deal. But when you have kids, or when you're older, when you have a mental health issue, you have a disability, etc., then it's a huge problem, right? So it's just a living nightmare, to be honest with you. I do loads of research with renters, and like I honestly would say to you, it's hard to hold back the tears. And like, I'm not a real emotional person, but like it genuinely is, because the stories you hear are harrowing, right? And that has gotten worse and worse and worse every single year. And while the government has been focusing everything on supply and everything on affordability, which are hugely important, they've just completely ignored this issue. So unfortunately, in my view, the left parties then went kind of to the other extreme of lifetime security of tenure. You can never be evicted. And it seems to me what is really obvious that we need, and we need to get this immediately, is some kind of balance, right? Because ultimately, a landlord is not, you're not going to have landlords if they can never get their property back, right? Because it just, there'd be no point in being a landlord, because at some point you need to be able to sell the property, right? Or move into it if that's the scenario. So my view is, what you want to do is say tenants need at least some period where they have full security, and landlords need some point where they can get their property back. It's not rocket science. So simple way of doing this is saying, for the first X number of years that you're living in a rental property, let's say 6 years for the sake of argument, you can't be evicted if your landlord wants to sell, or if they want to move back in, or their daughter wants to move back in, or whatever, right? So from day one you move in, you know the exact day when your tenancy ends and when you will have to renegotiate with your landlord. So that means 6 months before that day, you say to yourself, am I about to buy? If you are, grand. If you're not, then you ring your landlord and say, what's the crack? It's coming to the end. Are we going to renew or not? If your landlord says yes, you have another 5 years or 6 years in the same conditions. If your landlord says, no, we're not going to renew the tenancy because I need to sell this now, then you know you have to move out. The crucial thing is you can plan for it. So especially for people who are a bit more economically vulnerable, people who don't have family they can rely on, people with health issues, people with kids, being able to plan for what's going to happen next is so crucial, because that's how people end up being forced at the last minute to move back in with their parents or being forced into homeless accommodation, right? And it's just so easy to achieve this. The other thing that I really want to underline here is this can be done for free. It costs the government nothing. All you have to do is change one sentence in the legislation, and this is done tomorrow. It's not going to frighten landlords away, because there is no landlord in the country who buys a property to rent it out and thinks, I'm going to sell that in 2 years, because you can't make money that way, right? Because by the time you pay for estate agents, solicitors, and all the transaction costs, it doesn't add up money-wise. You have to hold the property for a period. So landlords want to hold the property for a period. They don't need all this power to evict whenever they want. It's just totally pointless. And somebody needs to come in and say, put the kind of, if you like, the politics of trying to outdo each other out of the equation, and just put in something that's simple and can work for tenants and landlords. And if we do that, what we will do is, as supply hopefully increases, we'll take a lot of the chaos out of the housing system, because that's our big problem. We've got not enough housing, but our housing system, because our private rental sector is so crappy, it's really chaotic.
I couldn't agree more, and I don't think anyone could disagree with anything you said there. It's like some of the stories I get in as well. I'm a teacher as well, so some of the stuff I'm hearing, and as a father, you know, your empathy levels when people have kids, and just living in that constant fear of being evicted is just so stressful, and so takes such a toll on people's mental health. But what you're saying there isn't radical either. It's shifting more towards what other countries in Europe do. I find with our policy, we really struggle to look further than copying and pasting policies from the UK. And I was recently a part of an expert, I put expert in inverted commas there because I'm not an expert, but I was part of a panel that the government put together to come up with solutions for conveyancing and probate. And I was looking at a lot of stuff from Europe, and literally straight away they were just like, we don't really want to look at Europe because it's a different legal system, blah, blah, blah. We don't want to look any further than the UK. And I was like, well, then what's the point, you know? Because there are places that are doing things a lot better in Europe. And I know we try and take bits from the Vienna model, the cost rental and all that, but we changed it. It's not actually cost rental, it's market rate, whereas in the Vienna model it's more on cost. So there's nothing radical there, and it's just maybe looking at shifting policy towards what's standard in Europe. And I even struggled with, during the campaign, this eviction ban, and even labeling it as an eviction ban for people then that aren't paying attention, and landlords, then it just creates this uproar from landlords saying, because they think they can't evict anyone. And it's not an eviction ban. It's a no fault eviction ban. It means if people are paying, it's literally just going in line with standards in Europe, where if people are paying their rent and they're looking after the place and they're not being antisocial, well, then they're grand. You just can't evict people for no reason. So it's nothing radical there. And what you're saying, it's shifting more towards what's the norm elsewhere.
Yeah, like absolutely. I think that's where, in my view, the left opposition parties went wrong, because they really didn't try to put in policies that sounded like they could work long term and that weren't too off-putting for landlords. And the rent freeze is a perfect example, right? All three, Labour, Soc Dems, Sinn Féin, were promising rent freezes. Okay, now we already have 2% rent caps. So if you're in RPZ and your landlord is following the rules, you can get you're probably getting, like, the average tenant is getting a rent increase of €32 a year under that system. And there was research just published yesterday from the ESRI that shows that actually the vast majority of properties in the RPZ are getting low rent increases like that. So if you put in place a rent freeze, that means your rent can't go up at all. So that'll save you about €32 a year. So it's almost nothing, right? It's completely pointless to go from a cap from 2% to 0%. It doesn't actually achieve almost anything in terms of making affordability. but it's really scary for landlords. Because just hearing those words rent freeze, it sounds like the government is taking over the whole rental sector. So, that's again where I think we need to get a little bit. I think Sinn Féin and the left parties, they felt they had to do something more radical than the government, but it pushed them into policies that I think people are afraid of. And we don't really, we need rental properties. So we don't really want to negatively impact the availability of rental properties. So that's, it's another example of where what we need is something that is balanced. It's based on the evidence and it can work long term, and we can get out of this cycle of, chaos on the one hand and then other people promising the sun, moon and the stars to tenants.
Yeah, and it shows the importance of words, doesn't it? Even changing the terminology of things could have made a big difference in parties getting their message across during the campaign to try and encourage people to vote for them.
Yeah. Oh no, I think the left really missed an opportunity here, because they could have just come out and said something much more sensible and straightforward, and they could have just said, look, Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael's rental market is broken, and we're going to fix it long term for landlords and tenants. And then instead they kind of went, and I'm a tenant advocate. I passionately believe in tenants' rights. I find it amazing that I'm in this situation saying that some of the political parties are too radical on this, because I've been working on this for 10 years. But in reality, what we need is something that will work in Ireland in the kind of medium and long term. And at the moment, no one is proposing that.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, thank you so much for that, Michael. Really appreciate it. Or Mick, whichever you like to go by. But thanks so much for coming on the podcast and chatting to us today.
Thanks, Kieran.
Agus Sinné Lahai an episode shut of the Crazy House Prices podcast. I hope you found my chat with Mick insightful and that it helped make sense of the recent results of the general election and also somewhat simplify the complex housing landscape in Ireland. A reminder to make sure you subscribe to Mick's Substack. It's called The Week in Housing. So just Google that and Substack and it'll come up, or click the link in the episode description. Please do share this episode with anyone you think might be interested. And if you're enjoying the podcast and my Instagram and want to show your support, head over to patreon.com/Crazy House Prices. Your support not only helps keep this podcast and the Instagram page going, but also gives you exclusive access to bonus content like detailed Q&As where I answer every single question sent in. Plus, you'll get the unique opportunity to engage with my community of over 100,000 followers, asking them questions that Google could never answer. Also, my book, How to Buy a Home in Ireland, is available nationwide. Just Google it and you'll find it in stock somewhere, or just rent it from your local library for free. Anyway, that's all for this episode. I'll chat to you soon. Slán go fóill.